What is up, my friends? How's it going? And welcome to the third episode of the Tactical Guide series with your fellow comrade Summary. In the previous episode, we spoke a little bit about army compositions, as well as how to set up an asymmetric army composition in order to counter a superior enemy. In this episode, I will be talking about how I use unit groups and how I deploy my armies, as one of the viewers of my YouTube channel, Adrian Tandrecki, hope I got that right, had requested to kind of display how I use my shortkeys in order to quickly deploy my armies on the battlefield. And I strongly recommend any player who's stepping into Rome 2 Total War, and in specific Et Impera, to use unit groups because they really help with the macroscopic as well as microscopic management of your units. However, in this episode, we will be primarily covering the macroscopic side of things. However, I will touch on a few micromanagement details. More of the micromanagement details will be covered on the unit-to-unit guide, where I will be displaying how exactly to use special units like chariots, elephants, and so forth, as well as my personal recommendations on how to use basic units like pikemen, hoplite, and so forth. However, before I jump into the details of this episode, I do want to mention, for those of you who have been watching my Let's Play Morian series, I have unfortunately recorded every single episode of that series, and I tend to use the Morian Armored Spearmen as my frontline troops. Now, for those of you who are not new to the game, you will notice that they do have the defensive formation that I never really use, and that is because I really had a negative perception of the defensive formation, and I will explain why shortly. However, I have come to realize that I was wrong, and defensive formation is actually quite powerful, and I would recommend using it, especially in a head-to-head confrontation, no matter what, and I will also explain why I believe that is. However, without any further ado, let us jump right into why defensive formation is so powerful, and for that we are going to compare shield bearers that have the Hoplite Phalanx Formation with silver shield swordsmen that have the defensive formation. So I'm going to go ahead and select 4 units of each type and jump right into the battle. Alright, so first things first, we're going to group all our hoplite into one unit, and we're going to go ahead and do the same for the silver shield swordsman. Now, as you can see, the hoplites have phalanx formation, so I'm going to quickly go ahead and activate that. And if you can imagine over here, the silver shield swordsmen cover a greater portion of the front line. They have a much larger coverage and therefore can take on a much superior, numerically superior enemy without the risk of being flanked, as opposed to the hoplite. However, most of you who have used hoplite as a frontline option know to always enable the phalanx mode, as there is no reason not to. Now, one of the reasons I never really enable this defensive formation on units that have the ability is because by doing so, you kinda lose that coverage over here. So let's just go ahead and quickly put them up into defensive formation, and as you can see, they are already really narrow. And if you kind of select all these units and you try to drag click them so that they are close to each other, you will notice that the gaps between the units kind of still remain. So the only way in order to keep those gaps, to close up those gaps, is to actually further reduce their formation width. And in order to do so, you can just click the entire unit, hold down the control key and tap the down key once, and as you can see, their formation has become even narrower. Now all you have to do is click on the map, and you can remember our frontline coverage has gone from about this much to this much. So this front line is a lot shorter, and therefore this unit is more susceptible to being flanked. And this is one of the reasons I never really used defensive formation, because I felt that I am losing a lot of that frontline coverage. However, if I bring my hoplite up front and compare them to the defensive formation, you can see that was just a placebo effect. It was an illusion, and actually the units in defensive formation enjoy the same frontline coverage as a hoplite unit. And if you are always going to enable phalanx mode with phalanx units, then you should always enable defensive formation with defensive formation units, especially if you intend to engage the enemy in a head-to-head confrontation. Alright, now why I would recommend defensive formation as as an always as a must to kind of use in battles is I'm actually going to explain the stat difference between a unit that doesn't have defensive formation versus a unit that has defensive formation enabled. We are going to first compare Hoplite units and their Phalanx formation, and as you can see, this unit over here on the right is out of Phalanx formation, whereas this unit over here on the left has Phalanx formation. If you look at the unit flag, you will notice this green emblem that kind of lets you know that this unit is in Phalanx formation and this unit doesn't have the formation enabled. As you can see, the units on the far right do have the formation enabled, but we are just going to compare these two units on the left. And so straight off the bat, as you can see, with the Phalanx mode activated, your weapon damage goes down. Now, the whole idea of a Phalanx formation is to offer more defensive bonuses, as well as take away a little bit of your melee capability. So this is fairly understandable. You can notice that even the armor has gone up from 41 to 44. However, there is a hidden benefit, and that is the melee defense. Although on a surface level, it might seem that the melee defense hasn't changed. If I mouse over melee defense over here, you can see the unit out of formation has a base value of 14 and a shield value of 5. However, the unit in formation has the same total, but the shield value goes up from 5 to 9, as well as the base value has been decreased to 10. And what this means is that this unit is more capable of dealing with enemy missile fire, so that's pretty useful, especially if you're being harassed a lot and if you are facing against a lot of nomadic horse archer armies. I would recommend using hoplites over pike phalangite that tend to be a lot more susceptible to missile fire. Now, moving on to defensive formation and what bonuses it exactly gives. As you can see over here, straight off the bat, you don't get any debuffs apart from the movement speed, which is pretty much typical for all formations, as you can see over here. So that's not much different from the Hoplite Phalanx type units or the Pike Phalanx units. However, when you look at the buffs that you get, straight off the bat you get +1 melee defense, and this is +1 to your base melee defense, so it doesn't really increase your shield value. However, you also get a bonus versus infantry, cavalry and elephants, with the latter two being at +5 and the former versus infantry at +1. What this means is that not only your chance to dodge an incoming attack is increased, however, your chance to even land an attack is increased. So instead of 16 melee attack, you will get 17. For those of you who have watched the very first episode in which I explain unit stats in detail, you will understand that this is quite an important bonus. This bonus also adds on to the weapon damage, so you do get 1 weapon damage, and that might not seem like much. However, over time, 1 single point of additional weapon damage can make a difference. Let's say you land 10 hits, you kind of get 10 health points removed. So keeping in mind that most units have about 70 to 80 health points, you're talking about more than 10% damage increments. So that's very powerful, and even more powerful against cavalry and elephants, because you are getting a significantly higher weapon damage and melee attack chance. But the biggest buff, in my opinion, the biggest buff of all, is that increment to armor. 53 armor. That is insane. There are not that many units in the game that can boast of this armor rating. And the only units that can are pretty much mounted units like the cataphracts of the east of Parthia, the nomads, and even some cataphract units of the Hellenic Diadochi like the Bactrians and the Seleucids. However, 53 armor on a infantry unit is absolutely insane. It is crazy powerful. And why am I raving so much about 53 armor? Because as you can see, without the formation enabled, the armor is only 38. So this gives a flat increment of 15 armor as a buff to the unit. And for most of you who do recollect, the Mauryan Armored Spearmen have an armor rating of 25. So by activating defensive formation, I actually can bump that up to 40 instead of 25. And that is insane. There are not many infantry units that have an armor value of 40. And although armor is pretty much a chance to kind of fire, as I have mentioned in my first video, you kind of roll between 1 to 53. However, what this means is that if a unit kind of has a total weapon damage or a base weapon damage of 25, then the chance to roll higher than 25 in this case is 50%. So you're talking about blocking every single damage 50% of the time. Or rather, it kind of works like a coin toss for those of you who can understand probability in depth. You will know that this is pretty much a very big deal as opposed to 25 armor rating, which means that you have pretty much, 24 out of 25 chance of always taking a damage, which means you have less than, I don't know, somewhere around 4% chance of blocking the damage versus a 50% chance of blocking the damage. That is huge, right? So yeah, long story short, always use defensive formation. I am terribly sorry that I haven't done so in my campaign. And I have taken the opportunity to kind of make amends for my mistake and kind of show you guys just how powerful defensive formation is. And you kind of have to use it, especially if you're using this unit as a frontline unit. However, if you do want to use this unit to kind of flank the enemy, let's say pretty much just your center 2 units have been engaged and you do have the freedom to move these units around, I would recommend disabling the defensive formation so that they have more maneuverability at a speed of 2 instead of 1. And once they do engage the enemy, you can re-enable that defensive formation. As you can see, defensive formation, in my opinion, is even more powerful than the Hoplite Phalanx Formation, and that is because it comes with no debuffs. You don't get a debuff to your weapon damage, and in fact, it's only positives for doing so. However, without any further ado, let us hop right out of this and go into the purpose of this video, which is pretty much more elite army compositions and my short keys on how to deploy armies quickly and more efficiently. Alright, so here we are in the army selection screen, and I haven't really set up an enemy army because the whole purpose is not to actually fight or battle, but to rather show you how to set up your armies. And we are going to go with an elite army, as in the previous video we went with a fairly levy tier army. And what I would recommend is always getting one of the best, if not the best, cavalry units for your general, simply because of the mobility that they have. And for that, it's a no-brainer. We are going to go with the late Royal Guard Cavalry, as they are the best. They have the best armor rating and they also have the best melee defense rating. You also want your general to be more defensive as a type of unit, because typically, I mean, personal preference is that typically I don't like to use my general really aggressively. You could get unlucky and kind of lose your general as the very first unit. Even though you have 100 units of cavalry right here, your general might be the very first unit to die within that unit, and you know, that would really be bad for you. And you pretty much, if that happens, your entire army suffers from a debuff to their morale. Next up, I would like to set up my infantry line, and in order to do so, I usually recommend 4 to 5 frontline units, and no frontline unit is better than your Silver Shield Thorax Pikemen. Pikemen by far are the best units in a head-to-head confrontation, and that is understandable. They should be. They do have the advantage of reach. They are not killing machines, however they are extremely defensible, and at the same time they are kind of vulnerable to missile fire. And for most of you who have seen the second episode, you will know that I do like to have screening units to protect my more vulnerable units from missile units, and for that purpose I am going to get a couple of Turiophori. Now, Turiophori aren't elite units. They are fairly levy tiered units. However, they do have a very big shield value of 7. Therefore, they have about 70 to 75% chance to block any incoming missile. So they are significantly better than even your Silver Shield Thorax Pikemen, because they only have a shield value of 6, which is fairly respectable for a Phalanx Pike Phalanx unit. As you will notice, most Pike Phalanx units have a much lower shield value. I guess the Seleucids do have high shield value across the board, and that is kind of nice. However, if you look at any other faction, let's take the Athenians over here and look at their pikemen. Their shield value will be somewhere around the 4. No, it is at 6, so that is pretty good, I guess. However, I do believe that this 6 does not directly correlate to the shield values you see over here, because this 6 is actually a pike shield, whereas this 7 over here is actually a Thurio shield. So the block chance, if I remember correctly, you can't see it in game, unfortunately. However, if you dig into the database using RPFM Pack File Manager, you will see that their chance to block is only 40%. Next up, I also like to select some melee units, and we are going to go ahead and select the Silver Shield Thorax Swordsmen. The Galatian Thorax Swordsmen, in my opinion, are better. However, they aren't that easily available, and there is a unit cap, I believe. So you can't really use them all that much. However, I would recommend using them for your faction leader, your factionaire, and so forth. However, for the most part, you will be using Silver Shield Swordsmen. They come from your second class population, and pretty much right now we haven't really used any first class population. The Thurio Spearmen act more like a tank for melee incoming missile damage, and they only are third class population, so that is a good trade-off. They are going to be a lot more capable of dealing with missile fire, and at the same time any casualties you take aren't going to hurt you as much because it is coming out from your third class population. Straight off the bat, I do realize that I don't have the typical 9 to 10 units that I'd like to have as my infantry core. And in order to do that, I am going to select some units that can better protect the flanks of my Silver Shield Thorax Pikemen. And some of the best units to do that are none other than Hoplite Phalanx units. And the reason being is they don't suffer from as much penalties from being flanked. Swordsmen are better. However, they're not that defensive, and if you do get engaged in a frontline or in a head-to-head confrontation against a unit that is better as a frontline unit, your swordsmen will kind of lose out on that engagement. So I kind of like to use swordsmen as my reserve unit, as they are a lot more versatile on the battlefield. Another reason I do recommend using swordsmen is that I like to set up my army in a fairly balanced composition that can be useful in both a field battle as well as a siege battle. And pikemen aren't really good on the walls, and neither will your Thurio Spearmen, as they don't have really that high stats. Hoplites can be good, however swordsmen are the best, and they do get a bonus to fighting on the ramparts. So keep in mind, you want to have a minimum of 2 good swordsmen or axemen. So we can go for Phalanx Hoplite units to protect the flanks of our pikemen. However, even better than the Hoplite units in our situation, since we are playing as the Seleucids, are these Seleucid Royal Guards. Now they do come from the first class population. However, they also have the defensive formation, which is really good. They do have the expert charge defense as opposed to, you know, the ones that the hoplites, they do not really have that. And also they have a hollow square, which is useful against cavalry units. So I'm going to go ahead, unselect those hoplite units, select 2 units of the Seleucid Royal Guard. Now with that being done, I am going to select my cavalry. And as the Seleucids, we do have access to the Indian armored elephants. So I typically like one of the elephant units on either flank, so we're going to go ahead and select 2 of those units. We will be selecting a couple of cavalry units, so we can go ahead and select, let's say, about 2 of these cavalry units, since we do have elephant units that can counter their units. Then we want to select a couple of missile infantry, and I typically like to go for archer units because they are versatile. Slingers are better against highly armored opposition. Javelins are really powerful against cavalry and large, as they do get a bonus of damage versus larger units. However, at the same time, they are also good if you kind of flank the unit. And they do have, in the usual circumstances, they do have some fairly respectable melee stats. As you can see here, your pelters they do have a melee attack of 9 and 14. However, I always recommend archers personally because they are just so versatile. They do have that flaming shot that can quickly damage the morale of the enemy, and flaming shot is super useful. For those of you who have followed my Morian series, you will know that flaming shot is super useful at burning down enemy defenses, especially if they are wooden defenses. You can't really burn down a stone wall settlement. However, in the case of a wooden wall settlement, you can burn down their towers, and what this does is it really prevents a lot of casualties and helps your army take over the city with minimal casualties. Speaking of wooden wall defenses, we can also include fortification, since all fortifications on the map use wooden palisades, so it is a really useful unit to have archers to kind of use flaming shot in order to deal with those defenses. And lastly, of course, I do like the field artillery Lithobolos. Keep in mind the Scorpion unit is better at field battles in comparison to the Lithobolos, but once again the Lithobolos is a lot more versatile. It can be used in a field battle and can rack up anywhere between 100 to 300 kills. Whereas it is also super useful in a siege battle, as it can create large gaps in the enemy walls, especially if it is a stone wall settlement and you can't really use fire to kind of destroy the enemy defenses. Lithobolos comes really in handy. So as you can see, this army is fairly balanced in order to deal with any situation. Of course, you can play around, especially with the missile troops. You can get a couple of javelin troops if you fancy. You can also get a couple of slingers if that's what you like. The reason I don't really like slingers is because of their flatter projectiles, which means they aren't really useful in a siege battle, as they cannot really shoot over the walls, whereas archers can. You can also replace the Seleucid Royal Guards with your Hoplite units, and you do have several options when it comes to Hoplite unit. If you go for the Shield Bearers, you are going for first class units. However, if you do go for the Seleucid Hoplites or the Levy Hoplites, I wouldn't really recommend this unit, as the units protecting your flanks have to be a little bit tough in order not to break, because if they do break and start to rout, then your core of Phalangite is severely surrounded, and you know they will fairly be taken out of the equation really quickly. So you do want to have a bit of an elite unit protecting your flanks, and personal preference for me would be the Seleucid Royal Guards. However, you can choose whatever you fancy. And without any further ado, let us hop right into the battle, where I will be showing you my short keys. Alright, so welcome to the battle. Straight up, we are going to hide the tooltip over here in the bottom left, and in order to do so, you can use the shortkey, which is U. And right off the bat, I want to move my entire army away from here. Right, most players typically tend to select each unit and hop right in and go ahead and begin their deployment by drag clicking across the map. However, I do like a clean slate to work over here. So the very first thing I do is actually select the entire army, and you can pretty much drag click the whole army like this, or simply you can hold down the Control plus A key and it will select the entire army. Once you do that, you just want to move all the way to the back of the deployment zone, right click on the map, and pretty much it arranges your entire army over here in the back. And what that does is it leaves for us a clean working space to begin our army deployment. The very next thing I'd like to do is to set up my groups. I usually group my general as group 1, and the reason for my groups is mainly to help with micromanagement. And typically you do have 10 groups, so you have group 1 all the way up to group 10, and I would recommend using group 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 for units that are heavily dependent on micromanagement. And while the general isn't really that dependent on micromanagement, the only reason I prioritize him into group 1 is because he's the general unit, and you kind of have these situations in where you need him to respond really quickly to the battlefield, get out of a dangerous situation, or move to a part of the battlefield where your troops really need his support. And therefore I do like to, or I highly recommend grouping him in group 1. Next up, I want to select all my archer units or all my missile infantry and group them up to group 2. Now, one way you can do it is once again the standard, just drag click all your archers like this and hit down the G key to group them into group 2. Or you can just click one of the units, hold down the shift key and click the last unit, and it will select both of these units in the middle. And that's kind of what I do, especially if I have a variety of different units in my missile units. However, as you can see, all these missile units are the exact same Greek archer unit. So I can do a third option, which is to hold down the control key and double left click on any of the units, and it should select all of them for me. And now that they're all selected, I'm going to go very quickly, hit that G key and put them up in group 2. For those of you who have seen my Morian series, you will know that I like to set up my cavalry on the left and right flank as groups 3 and 4. However, I have had a change of heart, and that is because I have started to realize that when you have elephants in the equation, as we do have as the Seleucids, you tend to micro your elephants a lot more, and cavalry is pretty much a support for your elephants, and they are used to pretty much mop up any routing enemies or to hunt down some missile units of the enemy units. Once the front lines are engaged, cavalry can pretty much go all the way in the back and take out their missile units. But for the most part, we will be using our elephants a lot more, so I am quickly going to ungroup them, set my elephants into groups 3 and 4, with 3 being the left flank, 4 being the right flank, simply because it is easier to kind of understand, but just by looking at this unit bar, that 3 being on the left is your left flank, 4 being on the right, with regards or with respect to 3 is on your right flank. Next up, I like to set my core front lines into group 5. And in order to do so, I do want my phalangite in the center, flanked by heavy spear infantry. And now there are a couple of ways to do this. One of the very slow ways is to actually manually click and, assign each unit. Okay, we're going to take each unit and put them up over there. But that takes like forever. And, the quicker way to do this, however, is, let's say I have these 2 units, put them here, put them here. If I select all of them, group them up, and just right click on the map, you see they have already automatically gotten into formation. However, there's one small issue, and that is that, you only have the Royal Guard on the left flank and all your pikemen on the right flank. So there's no one here to protect the right flank of this phalangite unit. And in order to make it so that they are, properly arranged, I am quickly going to ungroup it. There are 2 options you can do. One is select this unit over here, because he's pretty much on the left of this pike unit, and select the remaining pike units, quickly create the group, click him over there, and as you can see, he's already in that arrangement, and all we need is the unit on the right flank. So we are going to quickly select this unit, hold down the control key and hit 5. And you can see he has been added, and right over here it looks like they are in that formation. So now if I click on it, you can see I have my Royal Guard on the left and the right flank with my pike units in the center. So this is a fairly quick way to do it. It does take some getting used to. However, as you can see, I ungrouped them and they have gone back to the same old way. However, there is another way to do it, and that is basically to hold down your control key and select the units in the order you want them to be arranged. Now, the game does remember chronologically the clicks you have done. So let's say I have clicked this Royal Guard, and then each pike unit, and then the Royal Guard on the right flank. And now I group them up. You can see the game has remembered it. If I click on the map, they are in the proper formation. Right, so now that my core units have been selected, I am going to select my screen units, which is basically my Thurio-4i. Once again, hold down the control key, double left click on the unit. It selects both of them. Quickly group them up as group 6, and as you can see, they are fairly narrow, and they aren't going to cover my entire front line, but I can quickly increase their width by holding down the control and up arrow keys and tapping it like so. And as you can see, their width has increased. However, they are conflicting with each other. And in order to correct that, all I have to do is click once again. And as you can see, now they are in that proper formation. Very quickly, I am going to move my archers in behind the screen units. And as you can see, they are kind of popping out or peeking out of the formation. And this leaves them vulnerable to enemy cavalry charges. So I do want to tuck them in behind the Tutor 4i, and one way I can do that is create a slight gap with my Tutor 4i by clicking the one on the left, maybe double tap on that left key to move them to the left twice, and to do the same with the unit on the right, double tap and they move to the right. And as you can still see, we are kind of sticking out a little bit on the left and right flank, so I am going to select all my archers by quickly pressing the 2 key since they are in group 2. Hold down Control and the down arrow key, and as you can see, their formation width is reducing. And once I am happy, let's say I'm happy with that, I can just click right again, and as you can see, they are nicely tucked in. There is a gap in the center, and that is kind of like a, you might think that that's really stupid because a cavalry unit can charge into that gap. However, most cavalry units aren't going to be that narrow in formation. They are going to be slightly wider. So if they do take that bait and try to attack through that gap, they are going to get held down by my screen units. So yeah, nothing to worry about with that narrow gap. If you are feeling not so confident, you can slightly decrease the gap like so, and further decrease the width of your archer line like so. And as you can see, your frontline core is pretty much sorted. And with that, we are next up going to sort out our reserve troops. So I do want one swordsman on the left. He will be in group 7 behind, and one in group 8 over there behind. Fairly simple. And we can actually put them in a single group. And we will know that the one on the left is on the left and the one on the right is on the right. And the reason we are going to put them in a single group is that we don't have that many groups left. We do have group 8, which will be our Lithobolos. That will be slightly behind. And we have our cavalry on the left and right flanks in group 9 and 10. So we can quickly go ahead, set up our elephants on the left flank, click on 9, just click right behind the elephants, as you can see, nicely set up. Elephants on the right flank. Click on 10, get our cavalry on the right flank as well. And finally, let's not forget our general. We can either select to put him in the middle of the entire formation, and this is usually what I recommend, as he is able to quickly react to any situation on the battlefield and is equidistant from both the left and right flanks. However, me personally, playing as a Hellenic faction, I tend to like the meme of the general occupying the prestigious right flank, so I tend to keep him on that right flank, move my cavalry a bit out. I don't like to stick my general all the way out on the right flank. I do like to keep him kind of protected, kind of shielded in. And let's say the enemy cavalry unit charges this way, my elephants can engage, my cavalry can support, and that kind of creates a gap very similar to Gaugamela, through which my general can charge and exploit and hit pretty much enemy missile units, as I don't mind using my general in such a fashion in an engagement where I know he has no chance of taking casualties and can pretty much rack up a lot of kills without any risk. So as you can see, we have very quickly arranged our armies just by using a few tips and tricks and a few shortkeys. It will take some time for you guys to get used to this. However, I do recommend practicing, and practice makes perfect. For most of you who have seen my video, I still tend to botch things up from time to time. And one final thing I would like to recommend is actually grouping up your core troops in a locked formation. In order to do that, you want to select the group, so you can hit 2 for selecting your archers, hold down Ctrl and G, and as you can see, the unit group is locked, which means typically they will move in the exact same formation. So for that, let's just go ahead and start the battle. And as you can see, if I click on group 5 and I do want them to rotate slightly to the left, let's say an enemy is attacking me from the left, all I have to do is hold down the Control key. Oops. I am going to stop the Lithobolos from attacking the enemy. Unfortunately, the enemy is going to march, so I don't have a lot of time to kind of display what I have to. So we're going to have to be quick about this. So we're going to select Unit 5, and if I hold the Control key and hit on left, you will see they will rotate entirely to the left. So that kind of helps reorient my army a little bit. I can do the same for groups 2, and I can do the same for group 6. So you can see pretty much my entire army has kind of reoriented. And if I want them to turn face again, face the front, all I have to do is rotate to the right, which requires Control and the right key. Next up, the next useful key is the J key, and that is pretty much to turn your units about face. As you can see, this unit is kind of facing forward. However, if I do have an enemy or a reinforcing enemy army coming from behind and I quickly want to reorient my units. Let's say typically I want to reorient my reserve units to kind of turn around quickly. One way most players do is hold them down and kind of select on the map. That takes a lot of time. All I have to do is instead simply hit the unit, tap the J key, J for Julius Caesar, and as you can see, they move slightly ahead and then turn about face like so. That is beautiful, right? However, do keep in mind if your unit is locked, and I'm going to pause here because the Athenians are getting close, right? Right, so if you do hit the J key for a unit that is locked in formation, they are going to maintain the exact same position, which means that this unit being the left flank and this unit being on the right flank, when they turn around, this becomes the new left flank and this becomes the new right flank, right? So what they're going to do is they're actually going to switch positions and try to get into that left and right flank. Meanwhile, this pike unit will try to come into this position, this pike unit over here. These two pike units will kind of swap with each other. And what that does is that leaves a very messy situation. Like, I am going to quickly unpause over here. Perhaps turn off the fire at will for my Thureophori. Right, quickly unpause over here. Select group 5, hit that J key, and as you can see, they will create a chaotic situation over here. So you won't be able to about face the enemy in time. And in fact, you can be charged in a formation breach or in the rear in this fashion. So what I would recommend is I am going to quickly forward so that they kind of finish this mess. Or I'm just going to hit the J key again so that they do that mess all over again. Okay. And we are going to quickly pause the battle. Right, and so what you want to do, especially if you have a locked unit like this, is that you want to unlock the unit before you issue the J key. So quickly fast forward so that they get a little bit into position. All right, Control G to unlock the unit once more, and now I'm gonna unpause and hit the J key, and you see now they will all move forward. And this unit over here on my right flank becomes the new left flank. This unit over here on the left flank becomes the new right flank, and so forth. This is really quick way to reorient your army. Alright. And one final thing before I go ahead and end the video is the next use of the J key. J key can be used as micromanagement, and I will show you here shortly. I am going to move this cavalry in and around the Hoplite unit. Quickly select both of my elephant units, turn off that fire at will. Gonna fast forward over here. Thureophori aren't going to win against Hoplite units. Hoplite units are really good, however, they have taken a fair bit of casualties from all that missile damage. And now that my cavalry is in position, I am going to show you what the J key can do. And pretty much the J key also acts as a kind of memory of what is the last known unit location. So currently, this unit location is over here as it has stopped over here. And once it has stopped, I can issue a charge. And once they complete charge, if I press down the J key, it will order the unit to return to its last known position. So we are very quickly going to kind of fast forward over here. 1, 2, hit the J key, and as you can see, the unit is moving back into its original position. So this is one very helpful tip in order to cycle charge your enemy units, is to pretty much select cavalry units, issue the charge order, and then tap the J key. But keep in mind, you want to pretty much just deal your collision damage, which is pretty much the damage right at the second of impact. Wait a couple of seconds and then hit the J key. If you wait for too long, however, the memory will be refreshed and the new remembered last known location will be right there, so they won't really charge back to their original location. This is a really helpful micromanagement tip, although we are talking primarily about macro-managing your army, which I do believe we have fairly covered in this episode. I would say that this is quite useful and I tend to use it a lot, especially for shock cavalry. One final thing before I go ahead and end the video is you can actually select your entire army. Let's go ahead and quickly pop him over there before these guys run out of the battle, consequently ending the battle, and I can't really show you much. I do believe the next time I should not get the Lithobolos, as that kind of entices the enemy, even though it's a defensive army, to kind of engage, close that gap. So these units are pretty powerful. I would always recommend using these units because it can keep your front line fairly organized. and you will significantly decrease your need for micromanagement. However, yeah, without any further ado, let's see how I move my entire army. And you can Control A to select your entire army. Click on any unit with your left mouse button and hold down that left mouse button. Drag, and if you release it, it should move the entire army in a double speed, or in moving in a really fast speed. Now this can get pretty chaotic, as units with typically faster unit speed will kind of reach ahead of your main army. So in order to move them in a slow fashion that is more organized, all you have to do is the same thing all over again. Control A, hold down that left key, drag, and before you drop the click, you must hold down the control key, and you will see this kind of icon in which you can kind of reorient your army by moving your mouse to the left or right. However, you do want that same orientation. You're just holding down the control key and then release your left mouse button before you release the control key. And now, as you can see, they are all marching in a slow pace, and that keeps the formation fairly intact and therefore ready to react to any enemy movements. If you move a lot faster, you will be able to cover a lot more ground and reach the enemy a lot quicker. Keep in mind that a lot of players are impatient, myself also formerly, and that is because I kind of want to jump right into the battle and I don't really want to wait. However, if you do use the Lithobolos, the enemy typically should try to also march up to you. And that kind of helps speed things a bit, because while you're marching out to meet them, they are also marching to meet you. And once your Lithobolos gets in range, you can pretty much stop them by hitting the backspace. And as you can see, they have been stopped. However, hitting backspace also turns off the fire at will. So you want to toggle that back on and then select which unit you want to hit. I would recommend selecting the most densely packed and numerous units to inflict the maximum casualties. If you are not fancying that, you can also select the most dangerous units like their general and their elite spearmen and so forth. Right. So now that your army is marching slightly up ahead, not only do they maintain their formation relatively better, they also conserve their stamina. And stamina is very important, as you will see over here. When they are fresh, they do have 100% strength, which means their melee attack, melee defense, and other melee or missile related stats stay at about 100%. However, it can drop all the way down to 50% if you are not careful and the unit becomes exhausted. Right, and 50% is a big debuff. As you can see, if we look in the case of the Turi or Forai, 50% melee attack actually means a melee chance to hit of 3 to 4%, and a melee defense chance of 17% drops all the way down to 8%. So you're looking at a pretty harsh penalty for units that are exhausted. So that is also one of the reasons you can typically cycle your units in a battle, especially if you have reserve units. You can give your frontline units some time to recuperate, and your reserve units can take some of the fighting, and then you can cycle in your frontline units again and pull out your reserves. Right, so yeah, I guess pretty much with that, we are kind of done with this video. However, one final tip is that if you are still too impatient like me and you don't really want to wait for the unit to march into formation, instead of making them run, there's something else you can do. You can make them march like this and just fast forward the battle. That is a lot better. And you are conserving your stamina and maintaining your formation, and the minute you feel you need to slow things down, just go ahead and play the battle again on the normal play speed, and you can hop right into the battle and enjoy, your battle. However, I do hope you liked the video. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it. And if you liked the video, please like the video. Don't forget to subscribe if you are interested for more. Peace and love.